All right, so let's get started. We did the beginning of chapter 28 last week. And what we have at the beginning, all right, basically what's happening now, starting in chapter 28, we basically have two different scenes that we're going to be jumping back and forth. So in chapter 27, we saw how David is dealing with Achish, the king of the Philistines, one of the princes of the Philistines, and he's basically going out and attacking Amalekites and similar who are enemies of Israel, but he's pretending to Achish that he's really attacking Judeans, so that he can, Achish will trust him and won't suspect that he is really siding with Israel. And of course, in the beginning of chapter 28, we see how critical that is, because the Philistines are now gathering to do war against Israel. And so the beginning of that, we still have this item about David and Achish, where we learn that Achish trusts him so much that he makes him his chief of staff, or his, chief advisor or whatever in this war. But actually, the first two verses of chapter 28 serve as not just a continuation of the story between David and Achish, but also serves as an important background for the next story. And that important background is the very fact of this Philistines going to war against Israel. The second chapter, verse 3, is another piece of information which we already know, and that is that Samuel died. Now, that's happened already in the past, and we already know that. And we also, very important, in verse 3, we learn that Saul had removed all this certain kind of worship, which in my English it says ghosts and familiar spirits. It's basically these people who call down people from seances, that kind of thing, or try to look into the future, all of which are completely and totally forbidden as being a part and parcel of pagan worship. So he actually wiped this out, made it bad, and it was totally against the law to do this. So that's also background information that we need for the rest of the story. And the beginning in verse 4, in verse 4, we learn again about the Philistines and Israel lining up for battle. Okay, and that brings us to verse 5, which really is the beginning of the story that we are about to embark on. Okay, so Saul saw the Philistine force, and his heart trembled with fear. So we have here again what's going on. Saul sees the Philistines gathering in battle against Israel, and he's very, very frightened. Now, this is very, very important, because we saw in the past, we learned about Saul's rise to power, and we saw that he was a very successful general. He defeated the Philistines, and he defeated the Amalekites. He just didn't finish the job, but it wasn't because he had lack of abilities, because he had lack of will. And he took on, there were other nations here and there that he took on, and he never had a problem. All of a sudden now, and not only that, when he chases David, he doesn't have a problem. I mean, he doesn't find him necessarily, but he has no problem mustering up 3,000 men and going after. He's always going into battle fully confident. And here, for the first time, we see he is trembling with fear. Is this because the Philistines are suddenly more powerful than they have ever been, or is something else going on? And let's see, verse 6 helps us with this. Saul inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams, by the Urim, which is the breastplate, or by prophets. Okay? Now, we see here then that it's not just a question of, is it really just that the Philistines are a little different? If the Philistines are a little different, maybe he would have said, okay, muster his generals, let's put together a better battle plan. He has an existential fear. He has a fear that is coming from a spiritual place, and he's already fearful that God is not with him. And so he's seeking God in a very unique way. We haven't seen this kind of behavior before. Now, one of the things, let's remember that we again, scripture reminds us that Samuel is dead. The last time Saul and Samuel met were when Saul sinned in not finishing the job with the Amalekites. And at that point, Samuel expressed great anger with Saul and told him in the name of God that he would be punished and that he would not, his line would not continue as king. And then we learn that they separated. Saul turned away from him, and they never saw each other again. So this is a critical moment, and he now is consulting with prophets. We know it's not Samuel because Samuel is dead, but there were always many more prophets in Israel throughout the ages than are recorded in the Bible. Only the ones that were very special and whose prophecies were particularly significant for, ever, are recorded. So Samuel dies. That doesn't mean there aren't any other lesser prophets wandering around Israel at the time, but clearly he's not succeeding in getting a message from God, not by dreams. Again, he goes to sleep and he's hoping that God will appear to him in a prophetic dream, and that doesn't happen. He consults prophets, it doesn't happen. What's the breastplate thing? Okay, here you may remember from chapter 23, verse 6. This is after the murder of the priests at Nov, which of course was a huge sin of Saul. And after he's murdered all these priests, we learn that there is one priest, Eviatar, who manages to escape. And in 23:6, we learn that when he escapes, he manages to also bring the ephod with him. Now, the ephod and the urim is the same thing. The ephod is the actual breastplate. The urim are the stones part of the breastplate that goes on the fabric. Okay, it's the fabric vest or something, and on it. So it's really referring to the same thing. He takes it with him. That is the real breastplate. That is the real urim or ephod that it is possible through a priest to consult with God and get an answer from God. So what exactly Saul's doing here, because he doesn't have the real one, it's possible that he thought in the absence of a real priest, because he had just murdered all the real priests in Nov, that he found another priest and he created another breastplate and he thought that would work. But clearly it's not working. But what we see in general is that he is desperate, coming from a very spiritual place, okay? He understands and he senses. Initially, he fears it and senses that God is away from him. We know God has left him, but he really senses it now. And even when he tries in so many different ways to seek God, he is being closed out from God, okay? So then we see what he does next. Then Saul said to his servants, "Find me a woman who consults ghosts so that I can go to her and inquire through her." And his courtiers told him there was a woman in Endor who consulted ghosts. Okay, now we had just learned a few verses earlier that Saul had completely banned this practice, and it's very possible that he killed these women from before. But and that's why he says, find me someone. And he says, well, there's still one left. Okay, now she's someone who is, we will see. She is someone who knows how to do this. Okay. Raise up spirits or whatever. She knows how to do it, but she has stopped doing it because of the decree of the king. Okay, now I'm going to just now quickly give you the story, which most of you know, but I will just give it to you anyway, because I want you to hear the whole story. And then as we go verse by verse, we're going to be pointing out some things and asking some questions. So basically what happens is Saul disguises himself. He goes to this woman who's in Endor. Endor is, there's actually a kibbutz called Endor in that same area. It's in the Jezreel Valley. Everything we're doing here is in the Jezreel Valley. We learn the Philistines have already camped in the Jezreel Valley at one point, or near the Jezreel Valley, and Saul and his people are another point. And so they're really about to do battle. The Jezreel Valley is kind of in between them. And so he finds this woman nearby. Okay. And he goes to the woman and he says, I want you to, bring up somebody for me. I want you to bring up Samuel. Remember, Samuel's dead. That's why it's so important to remind us he's dead, because we're bringing up his ghost. It's not, Samuel's dead. And she says, oh, but it's forbidden. I'm going to get punished. I get caught by the king. She doesn't know it's the king. All right. No, so she's worried. He says, no, don't worry. You'll be fine. And she brings up this Samuel, who then basically says to Saul, I don't know why you bothered me, disturb me from the dead. You are going to die in battle. And just like God said, you and your children, and you'll be given into the hands of the Philistines. And at which point Saul absolutely collapses, and this woman, this ghost seance woman, kind of restores him, and then he leaves. Okay, so that's the basic story. Now let's go and see exactly some of the details of the story and what we can learn from them. Okay, one of the questions, though, I want to have overall on this whole thing is, and this is a fundamental question that Jewish commentators have dealt with over the ages, with different types of answers based upon also, to a certain degree, when they wrote their commentaries. Okay. And that question is and it goes to fundamental issue, when God forbids this kind of stuff, magic, seances, raising the dead, using these techniques to tell the future, etc. Do these things have power? Are they real? Or are they fake? Are they, today we know a lot about magicians, but magicians today are not real magicians. Magicians today are basically illusionists. They use sleight of hand. There's no spirits involved. There's no special powers, right? And so the question is, are there really these, shall we call them, sinister powers that exist and have power? But God tells us, do not go and solicit these powers. You should only ever be turning to God. Or is all of this fake? Okay. And therefore, and it has no basis, which when God says don't go to him, he's saying it's false, it's fake, it has no validity, it has no power, and you're just fooling yourselves if you're going to these things, much in the same way that when God says don't bow down to stone or tree or wood, we talk about idols that are made of stone or wood. We all know that they're not idols, they're just stone and wood. Is it the same kind of thing? Okay. And this is a debate. I don't know how you feel about this today, but I have very definite opinions about this today. But anyway, I'm going to present this to you, and that's something to keep in the back of our minds. And I'm going to point out certain things as we read the scripture to show you where some of the people have said different things. Okay, so here we go. Verse 8. Saul disguised himself. He put on different clothes and set out with two men. And they came to the woman by night. And he said, please divine for me by a ghost. Bring up for me the one I shall name to you. Okay, so first of all, we see he disguises himself. There is an ongoing theme that we've seen throughout the book of Samuel, where clothes are significant. So let's remember, first of all, that Samuel's mother, even when he was a little boy and he goes to the tabernacle, she makes him a little coat. And then we learn that every year she makes him a new coat, I guess, until he got to be an adult, and then he didn't need one every year anymore. But this is that coat becomes something that is important to Samuel. It represents the love of his mother to him. Later on, when Saul and Samuel's last encounter, he has this coat or a cloak or whatever you want to call it, and Saul grabs onto it and rips a part of it. And that becomes a representation of the final break between Samuel and Saul. And here we have Saul, and of course, there's another time where Saul is wearing a cloak, and David rips off the edge of his cloak, and then, of course, shows him, I was so close to you, I could even rip off your cloak, and you didn't realize it, but I don't want to hurt you. So all of these, the wearing of the cloak and the clothes is very significant. And here we have Saul disguising himself, not wearing his customary cloak, but putting something else on so nobody will identify him as a king. Also, 3 different times in the story, it mentions the word night. Okay, so we have here that the disguise of Saul is very important, and the fact that he goes out at night, he doesn't want anybody knowing what he's doing, because he's doing something against his own law, against God's law, and against his own law, to go consult with his soothsayer, or whatever you want to call him. Okay, but the woman answered him, you know what Saul has done, how he has banned the use of ghosts and familiar spirits in the land. So why are you laying a trap for me to get killed? So we see here she knows how to do it, but she has stopped doing it because she's obeying the law of the land. Saul swore to her by the Lord, as the Lord lives, you won't get into trouble over this. Now, there's a source that I saw that one of our sages finds this extremely ironic, that Saul's swearing by the name of God in the house of a woman who represents forbidden worship by God. Okay, and they compare it to a woman who is in the house of her lover, swearing in the name of her husband. So that's a very interesting thing here. Okay. At that, the woman asked, whom shall I bring up for you? He answered, bring up Samuel for me. Then the woman recognized Samuel, and she shrieked loudly and said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. What about the situation enabled her to see through his disguise? Okay, so it could be the very fact that he said, he swears in the name of God that you won't get. In other words, it's definitely no one thing that convinces her, but it's as if when she recognizes Samuel, it becomes the final step of a number of things that she puts together and realizes it's Saul. The first one, he swears in the name of God that she won't be hurt. So he kind of has insider knowledge there. Also, he asks to bring up Samuel. So like an ordinary fellow wouldn't be coming here and saying, bring up Samuel. Like that's something, the prophets, especially a key prophet like Samuel, converse with kings. They don't converse with ordinary people so much. So, this also is a giveaway. And then, of course, when she sees Samuel, she says, oh, wow, I see, you must be Saul. Now, I would say something else. She shrieks when she sees Samuel. Okay. So to me, that says she didn't really expect to see Samuel. In other words, if this is a woman, it's very possible that she works by sleight of hand, and she could create an effect that would create an illusion that she had raised Samuel. But here she actually raised Samuel. She surprises herself. She's clearly shocked. And I don't think she's just shocked and realizes it's Saul. I think she's shocked at the very fact that Samuel shows up. I don't really know how to do this. How did this happen? Okay. And the king answered her. And we have suddenly, instead of calling him Saul, he calls him the king. Don't be afraid what you see. And so it's very possible at this point he's been found out. And so he takes on his kingly attitude and his kingly demeanor, and he talks to her in a commanding sort of way, in a comforting way at the same time. Don't be afraid, what do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a divine being coming up from the earth. Now, what is this divine being? Okay, so people say, well, it's a spiritual being, or it's a dead person come alive. In other words, divine not in the sense of that it's God, but divine in the sense that it's supernatural. Okay, what does he look like? He asked her. It is an old man coming up, she said, and he is wrapped in a robe, okay, or in a coat. It's actually the same word, this me'il, that it's the same word that is used for that cloak, that coat that his mother had made for him. So it's kind of representing, this was Samuel. Then Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed low in homage with his face to the ground. Okay, so again, there's a difference of opinion. Did she really bring up Samuel or not? I don't think she did. It seems that up until the Middle Ages, there was very common this belief that there were such thing as spirits, and there were such thing as diviners and sorcerers and all that kind of stuff. And among Jews, it was forbidden to follow them, believe in them, see them as an independent power, but people did believe that there was some kind of spiritual something like this. Afterwards, in Jewish thought, more and more took a more rational approach and felt that no, this is not possible. There's no such thing as a spiritual force outside of God or parallel to God or under God. It's only the kinds of things that God would bring as a miracle. It cannot be something separate. So if you have a soothsayer, it has to be fake. It has to be a trick. It can't be that the soothsayer in themselves have the ability to do this. And that's I agree with that opinion. That's my opinion. But if you feel differently, it's, as I said, it's a difference of opinion. Here he says, so then the question is, clearly Saul sees somebody. Okay, Samuel, the ghost of Samuel, something comes up. So if she doesn't have the power to do this, what exactly has happened? And the answer to that is it is a miracle. In other words, the God himself, not the soothsayer. And this is the difference. The God himself has allowed this to happen, has created this image. And why would he do this? Okay, he would do this because he wants this message to come to Saul. Now remember, Saul sought God. God could have answered him through other prophets, through the fake breastplate, through a dream. God could have appeared to Saul in a dream, very simply, and told him what he's just going to tell him now. You're punished. You're finished. Exactly what I told you when you messed up with Amalek. I'm telling you again, this is your end. This is when it's happening. He could have done it, but why didn't he do it? So I think, first of all, God wants to communicate to Saul that he's in trouble. So he's distancing himself from Saul. He does not want to respond to him. He wants Saul to realize that he has lost the ability to communicate with God. Okay. And so he's doing this by the communication goes through the spirit of Samuel, which is speaking to him. Okay. And he's speaking to him in a very harsh voice. He's not sympathetic at all. He's very harsh. And we say very often that there are different attributes of God, but there are attributes of God that are more on the side of punishment, justice. You did wrong, this is what you deserve. You did good, you may deserve good, but it's based upon what you deserve. And then there's attributes of God that are more based on sympathy, mercy, kindness. So even if you don't deserve something, God can give it to you because he has mercy on you. He wants to bestow something on you. Not that you deserve it, but he's going to give it to you anyway. So in this case, Samuel is presenting a very harsh voice, and a very harsh voice that says, you sinned, now you're getting what you deserve. And it's that kind of voice that God wants to communicate to Saul, and he's doing it in the most distance kind of way. Okay, so now we see his answer. Okay, verse 16. Samuel said, Saul, let's start with 15. Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me and brought me up? And Saul answered, I am in great trouble. The Philistines are attacking me, and God has turned away from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or in dreams. So I've called you to tell me what I am to do. He understands that his problem with the Philistines is not that he doesn't have a good army, but that God has left him. Samuel said, why do you ask me? Seeing that the Lord has turned away from you, has become your adversary. I told you, Saul, that this was happening, and you weren't listening. The Lord has done for himself as he foretold through me. The Lord has torn the kingship out of your hands and has given it to your fellow, to David. Now, this is the first time that Saul's being told in prophecy. Beforehand, Samuel said it's taken away from you. Didn't tell him it was being given to David. Now, we know the story that it was given to David because we know that Samuel anointed David. We also know that Saul had figured out that it was probably David, okay? But we don't know that anybody ever told Saul that Samuel had anointed David, because that was kept secret, okay? But here, there's no room for doubt. Samuel says very clearly, not just that you are losing your kinship, but it's David who's going to take over instead. Because you did not obey the Lord and did not execute his wrath upon the Amalekites. That is why the Lord has done this to you today. Further, the Lord will deliver the Israelites who are with you into the hands of the Philistines. So it's not just Saul who's going to suffer, it's the whole nation of Israel who's going to suffer. Tomorrow your sons and you will be with me, and the Lord will also deliver the Israelite forces into the hands of the Philistines. So it's a terrible, terrible punishment. And Saul understands here that it's not just that the Israelites will also be punished, but they're being punished because of him. Now, the defeat of the Israelites is because of Saul. Okay, and we know that will be corrected later on, because when David comes to power, he will then defeat the Philistines. But for now, the nation is suffering because Saul got him into this mess. And what is Saul's response? At once Saul flung himself prone on the ground, terrified by Samuel's words. Besides, there was no strength in him, for he had not eaten anything all day and all night. Saul totally collapses. And at this point, we see a level of nobility in Saul that we haven't seen for a long time. All this past few chapters, when he's chasing David, he is basically running away from what God has said to him all along. God said to him, finish. He could have continued to be a noble king and just realized that his son won't be king. As we talked about before, he could have welcomed the fact that David married Michal. And so even though Jonathan would not be king, his grandchildren would be king through Michal. And he fought this. But what he was doing when he fought this, he wasn't only acting out his paranoia, he was fighting against what God had told him would happen. And here he comes to a point in his life where he realizes he can't fight anymore. He can't run anymore. And he realizes it himself. It's before Samuel even gives us these words. The fact that he goes to this extreme measure to go to the soothsayer. He understands that God has completely abandoned him, and he's so desperate because he knows God has left him. Here, Samuel makes it as clear as can be. That's it. You're done. And he falls apart, and he hasn't eaten. And here, this woman who, on the one hand, you could say, wow, she's a soothsayer. She's not supposed to be a soothsayer. She did something she wasn't supposed to do. And yet we see here, and it's a complex person. She's doing what she's not supposed to do. But on the other hand, she's a kind woman. She cares, and she sees how desperate he is and how he has totally fallen apart. And so, verse 21, the woman went up to Saul, and seeing how greatly disturbed he was, she said to him, your handmaid listened to you. I took my life in my hands and heeded the request you made of me. So now you listen to me. Let me set before you a bit of food. Eat, and then you will have the strength to go on your way. He refused, saying, I will not eat. But when his courtiers, as well as the woman, urged him, he listened to them. He got up from the ground and sat on the bed. The woman had a stall-fed calf in the house. She hastily slaughtered it and took flour and kneaded it and baked some unleavened cakes. She set this before Saul and his courtiers, and they ate. Then they rose and left the same night. And again, we see the night, okay? No one is going to know about this whole venture. He left in the night. He did something he was not supposed to do. He's going to go back in the night. Where is he going to go? He's going to go back to the camp. And he's now going to go back standing tall and realizing he is leading the nation of Israel into a battle that they will lose, and he will lose his life. And his sons, he will lose his life. And he knows that. And here you have this sort of nobility. Finally, when it's too late to fix anything, but at least he has finally come to a point where he accepts what God has given him, his punishment, his fate. He has accepted his fate from God, and he's going to go forward as a king to accept his fate. So, what do you think? Was she really a soothsayer? Or did she have powers or not? Silence.
I think if Pharaoh's, some of his diviners, they had powers up to a certain point. And what about Job with Satan?
Yeah, okay. That's very interesting. Satan, and that's very interesting. the Satan thing. Who is that Satan? And is that a metaphor? Did that all really happen? Or is this something that's going on in order to represent? I mean, the whole book is really about how do you respond when God brings evil on you? It wasn't Satan who brought evil. Satan is the instigator. He's the troublemaker. But it's God who brings the evil. And then the question is, can you still believe in God? So there, it's not like Satan has powers. He exists, but he may well exist as an evil force in the world. I think we all agree.
So he's going to and fro, wasn't he, throughout the world? So.
Yeah, there are evil forces in the world. But the question is there an independent spirit that stands against God? Or did God create the ability of evil? Okay, but here we're not really talking about evil. We're just talking about this very specific thing. Is there this thing? Now, the magicians or whatever, a Pharaoh, the sorcerers of Pharaoh, they had a certain power. So there are people who say it's real power, and some people say it's sleight of hand, but it seems to have some kind of real power. But again, limited. But again, it's not. It's still tricksters. It's turning a staff into a serpent and a serpent into a staff, and there's ways you can hold a serpent so that it's rigid, and there's different explanations for that as well. But it's not the same as saying this is what's going to happen to you. This is your future.
No.
That's a whole different ballgame. Any other comments? Okay.
In
yes,
our Bible,
Lynn.
Sorry, in our Bible, or in mine, the New King James, it refers to her as a medium. In other words, someone who consults the dead. And I personally have always thought any manifestation that they could have would not be real, as we've said, just, trickery. And I think, therefore, she was surprised when this Samuel
shows up, right?
Yeah, but then I've often thought I personally believe there are evil spirits, because we've got angels and evil spirits, and I think that perhaps an evil spirit, with other occasions, could say things, because you often hear of, I know it's not quite the same, but you often hear of people being hypnotized and things like that, and how can they know this? But the same evil spirits were around at the time of the Romans and at the time of Abraham and everybody, so can know things and say things to people. So I've always thought that it was probably an evil spirit, until today, listening to you, and I've changed my mind, and I think it might be really sorted. I think it was really Samuel today, because Samuel actually said what was going to happen. So from today, I think
he says, "Is what I told you before."
Yeah. Or a manifestation of a message.
Right. Okay.
So
yes, Jane.
Sondra, I think it's remembering that God can use anyone at all. So I think throughout the story, we are finding that Saul needs to come to this place of realization of him moving away from God. And God definitely interjected at this particular point, so that, he did finally get the message.
And it's very possible that the message has to come through this so-called medium, because this medium, even in Saul's mind, he's the one who bans it. He realizes this is antithetical to worship as God has dictated. And so in a way, it indicates how removed he's become from God, how he was forced. God rejected him. So he ends up going to the opposite of God to try to figure out how he's supposed to get back to God. It kind of indicates, it's an irony there as well, but it also indicates how removed Saul has become from God.